Hey everyone, it's Rob, and thanks for listening in today. I greatly appreciate your time. Today, you will hear my chat with Ruthe Farmer, Chief Evangelist at Computer Science for All, CSforALL for short. Ruth served as Senior Policy Advisor for Tech Inclusion in the Obama White House, and her work has been integral to the design, launch, and scale up of multiple national initiatives, including things like Aspirations in Computing, TECHNOLOchicas, and AspireIT, CSEdWeek, Computer Science Education Week, Computer Science and Cyber for Girl Scouts, Computer Science for All Summit, Computer Science by All, and now one of her very, very important initiatives, the Last Mile Education Fund, which we discuss in great detail. She served as 2012 chair of CSEdWeek, was named the 2013 White House Champion for Change for Technology Inclusion. She received the 2014 Anita Borg Institute Award for Social Impact and the inaugural UK Alumni Award for Social Impact in 2015. She holds a BA from Lewis and Clark College and an MBA from Oxford. The work Ruth is doing is so very important, and she is an absolute inspiration. So please enjoy my chat with Ruth. Ruth, thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk to you. We spoke last week, so I got a little bit of insight and learned more about you, and of course through our research. And I thought I'd start by asking you a question about a quote I read recently about Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Obviously, for those that are listening, not obviously, but for those that are listening, it is Monday, the September 21st, and Justice Ginsburg passed away on Friday, the 18th of September. And I read this quote in the USA Today. It goes like this: I guess I sort of had in the back of my mind that she might live forever, because if anybody could do it, she could. And this was a quote from a woman in Louisville, but I couldn't get her name. So what are your thoughts, your feelings on Justice Ginsburg and her contribution to our society?
I mean, we could probably talk for a whole hour just
I'm sure
about
we could.
Ginsburg and her contributions. A couple of things that resonate really strongly with me with her. There's a quote that you'll see going around where she talks about, leadership in a way that brings others along with you. And I think that's very much within my mantra of how I think about, I talk about my job at Computer Science for All as it's my job to get others to believe that computer science is their job, right? So that style of leadership of bringing others along, I think is really, really powerful. I am also, in awe of the simple fact that none of our lives as women would be what they are today if it weren't for the hard-won, persistent, and unrelenting legal battles that she fought for decades to make it possible for us to own things, to sign things. And I remember going to graduate school in England in 2007 and being shocked that I could not open a bank account in the UK without proof from my college that I was a student, without permission from or a letter. And I had a friend who said that her mother, who was a business owner in the US, when her parents moved to the UK, her mother had to have a letter from her father so she could get a bank account. That was 2007. So these benefits that we are enjoying as American women are largely thanks to Justice Ginsburg and all of the other, women that she has brought along in the legal system. And I've been sharing on Facebook my different RBG memories. And I actually saw her speak in 1992 at the Lewis and Clark College Law School before she was a justice, which was amazing. And her husband also spoke, which was great. And he was very funny and self-deprecating. And he's like, this is my first honorary degree. He's like, I think my wife has 15. And then I sort of the capstone. So I saw her before she became a justice. I also happened to be at the opera at Kennedy Center on the night that she made her debut opera performance in November of 2016. And when you work in the White House, as staff, you can sort of put in for a lottery for seats in the president's box at Kennedy Center because he has seats at every performance, but he's clearly not going. And so those were distributed to executive office staff. And the night that I got those tickets, the one time, was to see the opera and I didn't know RBG was going to come on stage. So
wow,
he is a huge inspiration, obviously, to all women. And I really believe that every young person, male and female, really needs to watch the documentaries, watch the full feature films, and understand who she is and what she had to fight to get to where she was.
Yeah. Well said. You mentioned Oxford and you received your MBA in social entrepreneurship there. What is social entrepreneurship?
So it kind of showed up in the lexicon somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, but essentially it's the idea of applying business principles to social change. Thinking about things from a perspective of building for scale, thinking about like what are the forces we can use to allow the best, most efficient solutions to rise to the top. And so what I would say is the most common understanding of social entrepreneurship would be something like Grameen Bank, social finance. But, and then there's, social enterprises, which are often for-profit businesses that have some kind of social good component like Tom's. But I would argue actually that social entrepreneurs are people who take an entrepreneurial approach. So I'd say the most successful social entrepreneur in history is probably Juliette Gordon-Low, who founded the Girl Scouts, right? Look at that organization. It is a self-supporting organization, has not significantly changed its mission statement in well over 100 years. And if you look at the budget of the Girl Scouts, the amount of money that comes from outside funding is very small. They pay for themselves. And that all goes back to the fact that, back in the day, and I've heard people be like, why are Girl Scouts selling cookies? They cause obesity. I'm like, I don't think cookies cause obesity. I think that lots of things cause obesity. But back in the day, the only thing the Girl Scouts could do to make money was to have a bake sale. That's what women could do to make money in the 1900s, right? And they made this bake sale, and it is the most successful fundraising thing in history. Not only are Girl Scout cookies like a coveted brand that everybody wants, but like 74% of each box is actually going to the mission of the organization. Like if you buy a box of Oreos, maybe 20 cents is going to your local store. When you buy a box of Girl Scout cookies, 74% is funding your local organization.
Mm.
And one little Girl Scout cookie data point, the Thin Mint cookie is the second most popular, highest selling cookie in the United States after Oreo, but it's only sold for 6 weeks a year.
That's amazing.
So like when people were like, why is Girl Scouts selling these cookies? I'm like, $880 million. That's why.
Wow.
Amazing. Because Girl Scouts gets funded $1 to every $4 given to organizations for boys.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we have to do to be able to fund that organization. But entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, is like going at it with you're designing it to grow, you're designing it to scale, you're thinking from the very beginning about replication and efficiency, and one of the things I really like to talk about is this idea of ethical scale, right? So if we have a limited pot of money to do all the STEM education in the world, how do we find the most efficient, ethical, high quality ways to educate kids that are actually gonna scale? You can't scale something that may be a wonderful experience, but costs $20,000, $30,000 per student.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not gonna scale.
For those that don't know, can you explain what STEM is?
Yeah, so STEM is sort of the common term now for science, technology, engineering, and math. And then, that would encompass things like computer science, that would encompass AI, pretty much anything that falls under the blanket of technology. A couple things I will say about STEM. One, I was there at the beginning when we were coming up with the term, and they were like METS and SMET and all these other ridiculous iterations, because at the time stem cell research was really controversial. So they didn't want to confuse people. But it eventually landed on STEM. But I think the word STEM has actually become a bit harmful in just that it does encompass everything, but it's not a thing. You don't major in STEM, right? You major in chemical engineering or computer science or biology. And so even though like we're constantly talking about we need STEM funding, what we really need is we need computer science and engineering, because all students take biology and all students take math. And so what I like to say is it's not that computer science and technology is more important than other STEM disciplines, it's that it is missing. And so often we get, funders are like, STEM, we need STEM. What they really mean is we need tech and engineering, because that's what's missing.
Right.
But at the implementation level, people tend to implement what they're used to and they're comfortable with, which is what they learned in school. Right?
That's true. Yeah.
You can't just say, hey, local like Boys and Girls Club, please teach STEM, and know that they're going to get computer science and robotics and AI. They're probably going to get, some kitchen science and some, soil and environment, all of which are important things, but that may not have been the intention and that may not be the need.
Right. Let's go back to the Girl Scouts of America for a second, because you spent some time there early in your career, and you created a program with some initial funding from Intel that really took off. It's now called the Intel Design and Discovery Program. And can you explain what it is and why it's so important?
Sure. I will first start by saying it is Girl Scouts of the USA, not
Thank
Girl
you.
Scouts of America.
My apologies.
So the Intel Design and Discovery curriculum, and I think the Design and Discovery curriculum is one of the most transformational experiences a student can have. That curriculum was really about, so Intel had recently taken over sponsorship of the Science and Engineering Fair, which until recently was called the Intel Science and Engineering Fair. And they found that there just weren't girls entering in the math, computer science, or engineering categories. And so they came to the Girl Scouts at a national level, and this was a long time ago, like 2001. And they had a grant for increasing girls' participation in the engineering categories of the science fair. And I remember a conversation where they're like, we want girls to win the science fair in engineering. And I was like, okay, I can have girls enter the science fair in engineering, but unless you change the fact that all the judges are men and all the judges are scientists, I can't make sure they win. Right? You need to work on some of the structural things, because when Intel took over, it was still very, very heavy science and hadn't really incorporated engineering. But what Design and Discovery is about, and I just got off the phone with the Invention Education conversation about that national movement. Design and Discovery is really about showing kids that they can actually have an impact on the environment around them. That the environment that we live in is built by people, and the world we inhabit is built and designed by engineers, and that if something doesn't work, you can change it. And so the first few days are like, look, the world is designed, here's all these things, let's play around with some different design solutions and see what we could do. And then you take kids into solve a problem that's relevant to you. So by the time we get them through the first 2 days of the world is designed, they're like, oh my gosh, did you know this? Did you see this? Look, if this thing doesn't work right. And I'm like, put it on your bug list. Put it on the bug list. So the bug list is a list of all the things that bug you. And then they take that bug list and they iterate it down to like something that they're going to solve and build a prototype. So by the end of 2 weeks, those kids have got to be able to stand in front of a group of people and say, here's the problem I'm solving. Here's how I think it could be solved. here's my prototype, and here's what I need to do for the next 6 months to get to that product. And then we would match them with a mentor from the engineering sector to help them. And it was really incredible, because I'm talking about 12-year-old girls looking at things from their perspective and in their world. And we had some incredible inventions from a girl. One of my favorites was called Bass Space. And this girl played the stand-up double bass. And when you do that, you have to hold your hand kind of like this. It's sort of like Star Trek-y or Nanu, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not very comfortable. Plus you're curving your hand to hold the bass like this. So her instructor would wrap rubber bands around her fingers and then put paper, like crumpled up paper, between the other fingers to hold the position. And, you know, that's not very comfortable. So she tested all these materials and ultimately came up with, using the plastic that's used for football mouth guards that you can heat and mold, coming up with a simple device that you would heat and then mold to your hands to hold your position while you're playing the bass. Super smart, totally marketable. You can manufacture that for a cent, right? And that was relevant to her. Like, that was personally relevant to her, but also an invention that's like a totally marketable product.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had another student who, she lived in the Southwest in New Mexico, and she was really concerned about cost of air conditioning. And she's like, why is it that all of our homes, the air conditioner, which is on the outside of the house, is plugged into the power in the house? She's like, why aren't there solar panels powering these air conditioners, which are sitting in the hot sun in New Mexico all day, right? So, I mean, this was an observation of hers about the world she inhabited. So it's really interesting to see the kinds of things that kids were perceiving as problems, but also they're like obvious solutions that have been missed.
Mm-hmm. I love this. Can you talk a little bit about Computer Science and Education Week? I know you've been very involved with that, and maybe you can explain a little bit about how.
Yeah, so I got into the world of computer science education in 2005. I was at the Girl Scouts, and we had become the informal education hub of the National Center for Women and Information Technology. And so started jumping into just very specifically, I'd always worked on STEM, I'd always worked on tech and engineering, and I was just kind of narrowing in on computing. And so ultimately, after my MBA, I ended up joining the National Center for Women in IT. And we were very specifically looking at the full pipeline experience of how are we getting more women, how are we getting women through this process of becoming software engineers. And what was really shocking was that at the high point in I believe it was 84, 37% of graduates in computer science were women. And it had declined by 2004-5 to somewhere around 10, 11%. It was terrible. And, you know, there were a lot of reasons for this. So in fixing that, like fixing computer science for women, we realized we had to fix computer science for everybody. Because it wasn't just that women's participation had declined, everybody's participation had declined post the dot-com bust. And it's way up now in terms of like enrollment in computer science is actually surging right now. But we started out working on like, how do we fix computer science education, finding that, you know, it wasn't available broadly in the schools. And when it was available in the schools, a certain kind of kid was tracked into that class, you know, through like parents, teacher bias, counselors, etc. The stereotypes, media. So this is a huge, big problem. Like we've got like societal things that have to change. We have structural things. So Computer Science Education Week started in 2010, and the goal there was to get attention, bringing attention to the need for computer science. And I was very early on, you know, I was helping out starting in 2010 when they launched it, and ultimately became the chair in 2012. And I did this 11-day tour during CSEdWeek where I started in New York and I ended in South Florida. So I had to somehow pack like that range of clothing in the month of December into one tiny suitcase. And I visited schools. I did events in Washington, D.C. We did an event at Google in New York City. You can see my proclamation from the mayor, Bloomberg, on the wall behind me. Now, Computer Science Education Week, you may have heard of the Hour of Code. There's all these events that happen that week. And actually, Computer Science Education Week coincides with the birthday of Admiral Grace Hopper, who was really pivotal to the world of computer science and the creator, really, of the idea of programming computers with a language, like a written language. And amazing. I highly recommend everyone watch the video of her on David Letterman in the 80s because it's hilarious. Number one. Number two, David Letterman's super young, but she was already old when I was born, but she was still around and she kept working. Like she kept retiring from the Navy and then this coming back. And so this video was her like final retirement. But she still then continued to work as a consultant, and she was just so hilarious but smart. And at one point, David Letterman says, "How did you know so much about computers?" And she's like, "I didn't. It was the first one."
It's great.
It's really great. Highly recommend.
So, and then you had mentioned you stopped in DC, I think, during your trip, and it just so happens you spent some time in DC as Senior Policy Advisor for Tech Inclusion in the Executive Office of President Barack Obama from 2016 to 2017. Explain about your time there and what you were up to.
So, I ended up engaging with the White House beginning, I think, in around 2012 or 2011, when we had an event around Champions of Change for Women and Girls in STEM. Mm-hmm. And from then on, I was just, in touch with and connected to the folks in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy that were working hard on STEM. They were working hard on innovation and reaching out to the community, which is the smart thing to do, right? Reaching out to the community. And I was part of that community. So eventually in 2015, it was looking like computer science was going to become a big part of the final year of the administration. And I was invited to join the administration as a policy advisor. And so it was the hardest, fastest, busiest, and best job I've ever had. It was awesome. It was breakneck, and I actually just wrote a blog about this I wrote it actually in January or February of 2017, but I'm about to publish it finally. That it was such a rigorous place. We had 140-ish science and technology experts in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And we were very focused on making sure that everything said and done by the president was right, was like correct and based on evidence and knowledge. And so within my first week, I was like commenting on and editing speeches that the president was going to say. If he was going to talk about computer science, I got to see that, which was incredible. Just being there in a very short period of time. It was also a really fast-paced and the smartest people I've ever worked with. I mean, every single person on my team was driving a big national agenda, like reducing the wait list for organs. One thing people don't know is that anyone in this country, in the United States, who's on kidney dialysis, that is being subsidized by the federal government. That is not paid for by your health insurance. And it's costing the United States government roughly $34 billion a year to provide kidney dialysis for all the people who need it. So reducing the wait list for organs, getting people to get kidney transplants is a really huge benefit to the country. And so a colleague of mine, Jennifer Erickson, was working on that work, which is really important. And other colleagues were working on like biotechnology regulation, entrepreneurship policies, rules to help enable space travel to Mars, like all these great things. But at the same time, not one person was above picking up a box, making name tags, going to get the catering, whatever needed to be done, because we were constantly having Americans into the building. Like every single day, there was a stream of people coming in and out to talk about whatever issue. And I remember in the first month, there was a hackathon on solutions for foster care. And, I hosted the Summit on Computer Science for All. And by the end of that year, so President Obama announced the Computer Science for All initiative in January 30th, 2016. By the end of the administration, we had gotten 548 commitments from the public and the private sector to advance that agenda. And that ranges from, Apple or Oracle saying, I'm going to commit money and resources, to school districts and communities. And one of my favorite commitments that I always talk about was one from an organization called Project Code Nodes, which is in West Virginia. And it was a collaboration between the Extension Services offices of a land-grant university and PAC, the Partnership of African American Churches. And they combined together to have coding clubs for African American girls held at Black churches. And that solves so many issues.
Wow.
Right? Transportation, parental, acceptance and comfort, and community support, like all those things. And one of the things we did in the OSCP was what we called scout and scale, right? We know that there are great people doing great things all over the country. How do we find those people and use the prominence of the White House to lift them up and share? Mm-hmm. So one of my proudest achievements in my time at the White House was I had always been hammering on the Girl Scouts, you guys, STEM is your thing. Nobody even argues that all girl education is the solution for this. You don't even have to quote research on that. Everybody believes it. So one of the first phone calls I made when I got to the White House was I called the Girl Scout Public Policy Office, and I was like, you guys, I will put you on the stage at the White House if you commit to computer science. And they were like, well, we don't have a funder. I'm like, you are the world's largest girls organization. Go for this. And they have gone so far. They've implemented, I think, 78 badges now, starting at age 4, where girls are learning robots and computing and cybersecurity. And it's not a special thing anymore. It's just part of what you do as being a girl.
Right.
And it's next to the, wildlife badge and the environment badge. They're all there. And they've gotten sponsorship from, I believe, Palo Alto Networks, Raytheon. I think Salesforce has been involved. And, it's you've got millions of girls already in an infrastructure. Let's use that to normalize computing as part of life of the American girl. So I'm wistful about the Obama White House, and it was as Camelot as you could expect.
What an experience.
But I worked until almost midnight every night. And I remember coming home one Saturday at 9 p.m. and my housemate was like, oh, you're home early. so it was a real busy time. And I imagine, I just recently rewatched a video interview that I did that happened to be on YouTube, of me in my White House desk talking to a group of middle schoolers in their classroom. And they were like, I said something about how many hours I was working, and the teacher was like, oh, that seems like a lot of hours. And I was like, well, I think if it wasn't the last 4 months of the administration, I might be working more normal hours. But because we were running through the tape, right? We were trying to get a lot done in a short period of time. But some of the hardest but best days I've ever had, for sure.
Amazing. And now you're the Chief Evangelist for CS4All. And I can only imagine, what a unique title, by the way. I can only imagine what your days are like, but explain, what are they like?
Yeah, so that's a title that I came up with. Proud of that. Actually, I've written
I can tell you're a great evangelist.
I've written every title I've had for every job I've had since 2008. So I think the best
That's
jobs
a dream.
the ones you create for yourself.
That's right.
So, Computer Science for All, CS for All is an organization. It's also a movement. It's also a state of mind, you could say. But, it's going to take all of us to get to Computer Science for All, right? And there's been this huge concerted movement, and it's really blown up to increase access to computer science education. Most people are shocked to find out that it's not there. And part of that has been the unfortunate conflation of ed tech with computer science, right? Just because your kid is using a computer to learn does not mean they're learning computer science any more than riding a car makes you a professional driver, right? So we've had to do a lot of work to make people realize that we've sort of lost that piece where we're actually teaching foundational computing versus teaching with computers. And if you go back to the 80s when they introduced computers to the schools, all you could do with a personal computer in 1983 was program it. There wasn't any software. Mm-hmm. Because all the software prior to that had been mainframe software. So when I was in school, I remember writing little basic programs so that you could print a banner, and it would print out on individual pages, and you'd tape them all together and hang them on the wall like these dot matrix things. Mm-hmm. And now, for a kid to get to the point where what they're creating even remotely compares to what's on their phone or on the devices they use, they got a long road to get to that moment. So fortunately, there's some really great programs like Scratch that have been developed to create that aha moment. Because what's really beautiful about computing and computer science and programming, and I don't like to use the word coding because really that's just the application of computing, right? I like computing, that's my word. That with Scratch and other, interactive programs like that, you can actually have that aha moment. You can create something brand new that's all yours very quickly. And that's what's so powerful is the creation part. And, anyone who ever tried to argue that there was some division between engineers and creativity is not true. It is so creative. And there's so much art in it and creativity. And then, if you go into user experience, there's some psychology in there. There's a whole lot that goes into computing. And I am really inspired about computer science for all because all of us live all day long in a designed and engineered world. And now we're all learning in a technology world. We're working, we're speaking today. Everything we're doing, communication is all happening in this virtual world. And that world is largely designed by less than 25% of the population. Largely designed by men, largely designed by white men or Asian men. And, women, people of color, people with disabilities are pretty much left out. And there is no way that the technologies we are using are the best that they could be with that kind of homogeneous design table. So I'm really convinced that computer science for all is going to yield much better innovation, much better products. We're going to solve more problems. We're going to solve problems for everybody.
Right.
And if you look at the lack of innovation in, say, things like women's health or serving families, I think that's a direct result of the lack of women designing technology.
Yeah. Yeah. We're stronger when we're more diverse together.
Yeah. I don't think anyone would argue against that.
Yeah. What you have something that's really exciting that you're doing now, in addition to your time at the CSforALL. I don't know how you juggle all these balls, by the way, but it's called the Last Mile Education Fund. Share with us what that's all about. It's really amazing.
Yeah. So in the more than a decade, I think I'm going on 2 decades of fostering inclusion of girls in technology fields. I've over and over seen great, capable students just get stuck or fall off the map. And over the years, I have used my social capital, or I've used my money to intervene and help these students get unstuck. And in doing that, I've just come to the realization that there's a real gap in resources for low-income kids to finish and to get to that next level. There's a whole lot of money and resources going into encouraging kids into the pipeline. There's a lot of money and resources going into getting them started in college, but we don't have much out there for them to finish. And the model of scholarships in the United States is very much on this, like, show us how amazing you already are, and we're going to reward you with support. And there's so much bias and circumstance built into things like test scores and the types of classes you've been able to take. You know, many kids that are low income don't even have the option to take a calculus class, which means when they get to college, they've got to catch up. Now you're out of sequence, right? And engineering classes are in sequence. So if you had to spend fall term of your freshman year catching up on calculus and other math classes, now you're like delaying graduation an entire year. So inspired by a particular student of mine who was literally going to cancel an internship that paid her $37 an hour because she could not afford to get a place to live for the internship, and she couldn't afford a bus ticket from Mississippi to North Carolina. And, you know, I helped her find a place to live, and I ultimately used my air miles to fly her to North Carolina. Today, she's like a homeowner. She's getting her master's degree. She's making great money working in one of the top banks in the country as a cyber, I think she does cybersecurity or information security. And like, her life has changed forever, but she could have fallen off the path just because of that stupid, you know, $100 bus ticket. And so the Last Mile Education Fund is designed to invest in getting kids over the last mile. So do you need a little bit more tuition money to take a few more classes to graduate? Do you have an unexpected medical or car bill that is causing you financial distress? Because most of these young people, like how I was when I was in school, they're walking a razor's edge of financial insecurity. Like, they're one unexpected bill from falling out. And so we launched Last Mile in January. We had some initial funding and a partnership with the Anitabi Institute, so Anitabi.org. And we started investing in specifically women of color from minority serving institutions. And the use cases were exactly what I expected. I remember one application that was, you know, I need $1,500 to fix my car because I have to drive 30 minutes each way to drop my kids off at my parents' for daycare. You know, so we've got a committed single mom trying to finish a degree in computer science. Like, let's make that possible. And then when COVID hit, you know, all these students were just plunged into crisis. So we pulled together funding from Anitabi and some other organizations, and we just started giving out mini grants, really small grants under $600, really fast, within 48 hours. Our first $70,000 we expended and dispersed in 6 days. That kids had no money to get somewhere safe. They had no money to eat. Now the dorms and the dining halls were closed. A lot of kids in crisis without housing and internet. I was shocked at the number of students who were computer science majors in their junior, senior year who didn't have a device. They were depending on the devices in their universities. So I've been working on this and building it up, and we've done a bunch of research. And one of the most startling statistics is that less than 20% of low-income students graduate with a bachelor's degree in 6 years. And so we're doing all this work to push all these underrepresented students and these poor students. And I'll have to say, 50% of K-12 students in this country are on free lunch. So we're talking about half of kids in this country would qualify as poor students, right? We're pushing them all into this educational process, but not resourcing them or breaking down the structural inequalities that exist in the education system. And, I recall one student said, I just didn't even buy the development board for one of my, higher level computer science classes because it was $700 and I just couldn't afford to buy something for one class that cost $700. Those are the kind of barriers we're looking to address. And then also, there's a lot of, even free opportunities are not free, right? Like you get a free ticket to this conference, but you also have to not work for 3 days. You have to front the price of a plane ticket. You have to somehow check into a hotel, even if you don't have a credit card, which means they're going to put a $300 hold on your debit card, which if you're a poor kid, $300 may be everything in your bank account. And so I'm really interested in figuring out, like, what is it going to take, whether it's a credit product or a change in procedures among organizations to like level the playing field. I've even had students say, it was so humiliating to have to call my recruiter when I was interviewing at Twitter and tell her I couldn't check into the hotel. Because then you're othering that person, right? You're now othered, and now you've like undermined their confidence. They're going into an interview going like, I just had to have this humiliating experience. So I'm really interested in fixing that. And there's 3 things about last mile that are important. One, we take an abundance viewpoint. I would rather invest in 2 or 3 people that weren't quite as needy than not get it to as many as possible. Like, so I'm taking an abundance viewpoint of who qualifies. I don't care what your GPA is, C's get degrees. As long as you are progressing, that's fine. I don't put them through a bunch of hoops. I don't make them perform their poverty. Like, I think the whole like begging for money on GoFundMe, I would rather you focus on studying and getting good grades and doing that internship than like trying to run a social media campaign to pay for your education. Why don't we just pay for your education? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things, like, we're about support, not shame. We take an abundance viewpoint and we see these kids as an investment opportunity, right? Like if I invest in you succeeding, you're going to pay it forward in the future to other people. You're going to support your family. Like everybody knows when you invest in women, you benefit their families and their communities. Like we're running around telling the developing world this, yet we're not practicing it right here in the United States. Mm-hmm. So Last Mile is focused on investing in undergraduate students that are already committed to, one of these high demand majors, tech or engineering, close to the finish line, and just making sure that they graduate.
It's a life changer. And when you started sharing it with me when we first spoke, it didn't take long for me to totally get it. And the stories are so impactful, like the one you shared of the young woman from Mississippi. And it's like you say, it's a fragile line, and I don't think that's the word you use, but it's the one I had in my head. So this is important stuff. If I have the website, lastmile.ed.org.
No, it's lastmile-ed.org.
Thank you. lastmile-ed.org. But we'll have it in the show notes because I can't speak right.
And on Twitter, we're at MileFund.
On Twitter at MileFund. So please check that out and support any way you can, because this is really important stuff that Ruth and her team are doing.
Share.
Yes.
Shocking. I turned 50 this year.
Congratulations. So, welcome to the club.
For my 50th birthday, I'm raising $50,000 in scholarships for women in computing.
I love this.
And I will give you that link that you can share out because we're at 33,400. So we're close.
33,400?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I just need a few more people to donate and get to that. I'm trying to get to that 50,000 by the end of 2020, obviously. But, I am so personally it's just so smart. Like, it just makes so much sense. I'm like, why wouldn't we make sure the ones we've worked so hard to invest in, and we have so many sunk costs in these kids, like, let's make sure they finish.
That's right.
And then they're going to turn around and become startup founders and contributors to technology and all the things that we're desperately wanting.
Yes.
Like, it's just, the ROI is so high and it's so fast.
And to your point, and then they'll help participate in the next generation of those that need a little bit of assistance with the last mile. I love this.
Yeah.
Ruth, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today and bring this conversation to the forefront. It's amazing, your background and the things that you're doing. I love it. It's so exciting. And to all the loyal listeners of the Leading with Genuine Care podcast, I greatly appreciate you spending time with us today. And I wish you all much love and gratitude.